ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. O Ramakrishna, the establisher of the eternal religion, the embodiment of all religions, and the best of all incarnations, we salute thee. In the last class, we stopped at page 284 at para 30. Today, we shall start from the same page 284, chapter 12 and para 1. Chapter 12, the sadhu with matted hair and the master sadhana of the Vatsalya Bhava. Sri Yogeshwari the Bhairavi came to the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar after the virtuous Rani Rasmani passed away in the latter part of 1861. The master applied himself particularly to the tantric disciplines from that time to 1863. Mathur Babu had the privilege of serving the master and thereby feeling blessed when the master plunged himself in those disciplines. Just as before that period, Mathur had become firmly convinced by repeatedly testing him of his extraordinary love for God, wonderful self-control, and glowing renunciation and detachment. So, during this period of his Tantra sadhana, as a result of experiencing time and again divine powers manifested him, that means Sri Ramakrishna, he came to the firm conclusion that it was the Devi, his chosen ideal herself, who, in the person of Sri Ramakrishna, had become pleased to accept his services and was protecting him in all respects and accompanying him everywhere, maintaining his influence and authority over the estate and covering him with a ever-increasing honor and respect. He thought so because during that time he succeeded in whatever he undertook and regarded himself as extremely befriended by the divine through the master. It was therefore no wonder that Mathur spent unstintingly large sums of money in supplying articles conducive to the master's sadhana and for serving God and performing other virtuous deeds according to master's wish. As the manifestation of the spiritual powers of the master increased day by day through the tantric practices, Mathur, who had taken refuge at his holy feet, found his ardor, courage, and strength correspondingly developed. His feeling was now similar to that of a devotee who reposed his faith in God and experienced in his heart extraordinary enthusiasm and accession of strength when he attained his grace and felt safe under his protection. But the devotion of the worldly Mathur, in whose nature Rajas predominated, remained quite satisfied with rendering service to the master and performing virtuous acts, never wishing to advance far into the spiritual level. Although this was so, Mathur was perfectly convinced that the master was the only source of his strength, his intelligence and his hope, that he alone was his prop and support in this world and in the next, and that he was at the root of his worldly prosperity, exalted position, etc. Mathur undertook the religious vow The undertakings that Mathur carried out at the time proved that he now considered himself fully secure in his worldly affairs through the grace of the Master. We read in the book entitled A Story of the Life of Rani Rasmani that Mathurnath performed a very expensive religious ceremony called the Annameru, the gift of a mountain of food, and other necessaries in 1864 at Dakshineshwar. Hriday said that besides plentiful gold, silver, etc., he gave away to the Pandits 1,000 maunds of rice and an equal amount of sesame, and appointed Sahachari, the well-known songstress, to sing the glory of God, and Rajnarayan, another famous singer, to sing the songs of Chandi, converting the Kali temple into a festive ground for some time. Hriday said further that Mathur saw the Master enter repeatedly into ecstasy, listening to the highly devotional songs rendered by those singers. In fact, he took the varying degrees of the Master's appreciative reaction in this respect to be the measure of their talents, and accordingly gave them as reward precious shawls, silks, and hundreds of rupees. Attracted by the humility and innumerable other qualities of Padmalochan, the Master met Padmalochan, the Vedantic scholar. Padmalochan, we hear about his biodata here further. Attracted by the humility and innumerable other qualities of Padmalochan, the then principal court Pandit of the Maharaja of Bardwan, the Master had gone to see him sometime before the gift of the mountain of food was made by Mathur. We were told by the Master that Mathur had a great desire to have that famous scholar brought to the meeting of Pandits, but convene at the time of that religious ceremony and make him accept gifts, knowing that the Pandit was greatly devoted to the Master. Mathur sent him an invitation through Hriday, but Padmalochan could not accept at that time the respectful invitation of Mathur. We have narrated in detail the story of Padmalochan elsewhere. The reason why the Master undertook the Vaishnava sadhana. The Master became attracted towards the disciplines of the Vaishnava doctrines after he had finished the Tantric ones. We find, as the result of our inquiries, some obvious reasons leading to that. Firstly, the devout Bhairavi Brahmani was an expert in the disciplines of the Panchabhavas, spoken of in the Vaishnava scriptures. Panchabhavas, the 5 moods: Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhura, etc., and spent long periods of time in mastering one or other of them. We have mentioned before that she fed the Master in the same affectionate spiritual attitude as Yashoda used to feed her boy Gopala. Therefore, it is not improbable that she encouraged the Master to undertake the discipline of Vaishnava doctrines. Secondly, it was but natural for the Master, born as he was in a Vaishnava family, to have love for the disciplines of the spiritual modes of the Vaishnavas. He had had great opportunities for cultivating reverence for those sadhanas which were prevalent at and around Kamarpur. The third and the most important reason was, however, that there was in the master an extraordinary blend of the natures of both man and woman. Under the influence of one of them, he appeared to be the best of austere, valorous men, fearless like a lion, who would not rest satisfied without probing everything to the very bottom. Under the influence of the other, he became possessed of a wonderful feminine nature, tender yet severe, applying himself to seeing and weighing things and persons in the world through his own heart. He became by nature deeply attached to or detached from certain things and could bear with ease endless troubles when the heart responded. But unlike ordinary people, he would do nothing when it did not. There arose feminine moods in the master's mind. During the first 4 years of the master's spiritual practices, when he did not accept any external help, he undertook the disciplines of the modes of Shanta, the attitude of the rishis, and Dasya, attitude of Hanuman, and sometimes that of Sakhya, like that of Sridama, Sudama, and other friends of Sri Krishna at Vraja, and attained success in all of them. The reader perhaps remembers that the master had recourse to Dasya Bhava and passed some time in the mode of Mahavir, to whom Ramchandra was as dear as life, and that he had the vision of Sita, Janaka's daughter, who suffered misery all her life. He therefore now applied his mind to the disciplines of the two principal devotional modes of Vatsalya and Madhura, practiced by the Vaishnava teachers. During that period, he looked upon himself as a woman friend of the Divine Mother, and he engaged himself in fanning her with a chamara. Dressed in a woman's apparel and surrounded by ladies, he paid obeisance to the Devi during her autumn worship at the Calcutta house of Mathuranath, and on account of the absorption in feminine feelings, often he forgot that he had a male body. When we began to visit the holy feet of the Master at Dakshineshwar, we sometimes saw this female nature manifested in him, but it did not then last as so long as it did at the time we are speaking about it. There was no need of it, for it then became easy for him, by the grace of the Divine Mother, to dwell at will in any mood he wanted. The Divine Mother to dwell at will at any whatsoever of a man or of a woman, or in that of a non-duality, which is beyond the modes and is the source of them all. He then stayed for the good of the visiting devotees as long as he liked in a particular mood. That means the master used to transform himself into different moods. Mood of a woman, mood of a man, a man devotee, a woman devotee, or the devotee of Radha, devotee of Devi, or devotee of Shiva. In different moods he could change himself at will. He had control on all the moods. That means he had mastered through sadhana all those different moods. Be that as it may, if the reader wants to form a conception of the greatness of the master's life during his sadhana, he must first of all consider deeply, with the help of his imagination, the uncommon elements his mind was made of from his birth, the manner in which he moved about daily in the world, and the nature of changes produced in it by the impact of the by the impact of the fierce spiritual storm that raged for the last 8 years of his life of sadhana. We were told by himself that he sincerely believed until he came to the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar in the year 1855, and for some time afterwards that he would lead, like his forefathers, a life of a strict, virtual householder. As he was free from egoism from his birth, it never crossed his mind that he was superior to anyone in the world in any respect or possessed nobler qualities than anyone. But his extraordinary speciality began to manifest itself in every step when he stepped into the field of action. He felt as if an unknown divine power accompanied him every moment, and then painting in lurid colors the transitoriness and worthlessness of sights, tastes, etc., held them before his eyes and forced him to orientate his life in an opposite direction. A selfless seeker after unalloyed truth, the master very soon accustomed himself to move about in the world at the promptings of that power. It is clear that it would have been difficult for him to do so if he had a strong desire for attaining any objects of enjoyment in the world. What he has said will become clear if one remembers the master's lifelong behavior on all matters. He discontinued his studies when he understood that the aim of the Brahmins in acquiring this learning was only buddling of rice and plantain, in other words, earning money. He accepted the post of a priest thinking it would be help in managing worldly affairs. But he soon realized that the aim of worshipping God was something quite different. Namely, to see God and live in God. And at once he became mad after it. He knew that realization of God depended on perfect self-control. And although married, he refrained from having any sexual relationship with his wife through body, mind or speech. He understood that no man could have perfect reliance on God if he stored anything for future, and at once he eradicated completely from his mind the idea of laying up even a trifling thing, not to speak of holding gold and other precious materials. Instances like these could easily be multiplied. When one thinks of these facts, it becomes clear how little his mind was influenced by ingrained tendencies that produce delusion in people's minds. The master's power of understanding ideas and making them practical was so strong that his samskaras could not stand against it and make him deviate from this path. The noble qualities of the master. Besides, the master was from his childhood a Shrutidhara, a person of wonderful retentive memory, one who could repeat word for word in due order what he had heard but once, and who could retain it forever. The reader already knows how in his childhood he, along with his friends, used to rehearse in the fields and pastures of Kamathpur the songs, the yatras and stories of the Ramayana, the Mahabharata and other books, on listening to them but once. So we see that the master entered upon his life of spiritual practices with this care. with the rare possession of an extraordinary, wonderful memory, love of truth, and of putting ideas into practice as the very basis of his practices. The three qualities which it is not easy for an ordinary aspirant to acquire, even by a whole life's effort. It was therefore no wonder that he attained in a short time great success in his spiritual life. The reason why we were amazed to hear that he succeeded in each of his disciplines, even in 3 days, was that you did not then understand an iota of his uncommon mental constitution. Illustration to the master's uncommon mental qualities. The reader will understand this statement when we mention a few events of the master's life. In the beginning of his spiritual practice, as soon as the master discriminated between the real and the unreal and threw into Ganga a few coins along with lumps of earth, repeating rupee earth, earth rupee. The attachment to gold, which spreads its influence down to the very bottom of the human heart, became eradicated forever from his mind. No sooner had he cleaned with his own hands those abominably filthy places at whose contamination people could not rest satisfied without a bath, that his mind gave up the egoism due to his Brahmin birth, and he became convinced forever that he was in no way superior to those persons who were regarded in society as untouchables. As soon as he was as he was convinced that he was a child of the Divine Mother, and all the women of the world were parts of her, it became impossible for him to look upon any woman as other than the Divine Mother herself. When one ponders over these instances, one clearly feels that the Master could not have achieved those results if he had not had an extraordinary power of understanding ideas and making them practical. The reason why we cannot fully believe in the events of the Master's life or are astonished to hear them is that we took into our own hearts and find that our attachment to gold will not vanish if we throw into water coins and lumps of earth 1,000 times. That the egoism of our mind will not be washed off, even if we can clean the dirty places, as Sri Ramakrishna did, the same number of times, and that the filial attitude towards every woman will not arise in our minds. At the critical moment, even if we are told all our lives of the manifestation of the Divine Mother as women, we cannot attain the results of the Masters as the Master could in these things in spite of our efforts, because our power of understanding ideas and making them practical is chained down by the impressions of our past karma. We enter the realm of sadhana with minds devoid of self-control and retentive power and full of such adverse traits, and of course we meet with corresponding results as well. It is doubtful whether even in the course of 4 or 5 centuries there will come into the world one with a mind of such extraordinary powers of the Master. It is impossible for minds like us even to imagine how unique the Master's mind was, how by nature it was endowed with self-control, and perfect retentive power, and was devoid of all evil traits. And how much greater power and subtler insight it attained by the impulse of an extraordinary loving eagerness and endeavor for the realization of the complete vision of the Divine Mother, which made him forget food, sleep, etc. for such a long period. We have already said that no falling off was observed in the service of the Divine Mother in the temple at Dakshineshwar after the death of Rani Rasmani. Mathur, to whom Sri Ramakrishna was as dear as life, was not only not averse to spending the stipulated amount in her service, but generously spent unusually large sums of money at the master's behest. Besides performing services of deities, he was greatly fond of serving holy men. For, owing to the teaching of the master, Mathur, who had taken refuge at his feet, looked upon devout holy men as the exact images of God. Therefore, when the master asked him to make arrangements for offering to the sadhus cloths, blankets, water pots, and other necessaries, besides food for the daily use, Mathur purchased all those articles and stored them in a room to its fullest capacity, so that they might be given to the holy men to their full satisfaction. He told his officers that the articles in the new store should be distributed according to the master's orders. Again, when he came to know soon afterwards that a desire had arisen in the master's mind to serve the devout holy men of all denominations by giving them articles useful to their spiritual practices, Mathur made due arrangements about it too. All these gifts were probably made in the year 1863, 1863, when the wonderful hospitality at the Kali temple of Rani Rasmani became widely known everywhere among the sadhus. Although even during the Rani's lifetime, the Kali temple had been regarded by the traveling holy pilgrims as a resting place on their way to the destinations, its reputation was spread to a wider region, and devout monks, the foremost of all of denominations, came there in large numbers. Pleased with the hospitality accorded to them, they went their way, blessing the manager of the services so devoutly rendered. We have recorded elsewhere all that we were told by the Master himself of the eminent holy men who came there in this way. We mention it here again only because we want to tell the reader about the time of the arrival at Dakshineshwar of the holy man of a Ramavat denomination at Dakshineshwar, named Jatadhari, by whom the master was initiated in the mantra of Rama, and from whom he got the image of the child Rama, called Ramlala. It was probably in the year 1864 that he came to the master, that is Jatadhari. Jatadhari's arrival. On many occasions, we have heard from the master himself, Jatadhari's extraordinary love and attachment to Ramchandra. The image of the child Ramchandra was very dear to Jatadhari. As a result of his serving that image for a long time with much love. His mind ascended to the realm of divine love and reached an inward state in which it lost itself so much that even before he came to the master at Dakshineshwar, he saw the form of the luminous child Rama actually before him, accepting his services which were purified by devotion. At first that vision appeared before him for a moment, time after time, and overwhelmed him with bliss. But the more he advanced in sadhana, with the passing of time, the more did the vision become intense and continue for longer periods, till at last it became as vivid and continuous as ordinary objects of sight are. Thus established in loving spiritual contemplativeness, he had the child Rama for almost a constant companion, engaging himself daily in the services of the image of Ramlala, with the help of which he had realized that divine vision in his life. Jatadhari travelled at pleasure to the various places of pilgrimage in India and came to the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar. Jatadhari, the intimate relationship of the master with Jatadhari. Jatadhari, who applied himself wholeheartedly to the service of Ramlala, did not divulge to anyone that he had the privilege of having every now and then the vision of the form of the child Rama, the embodiment of love. Almost all the great people, they never talk about their divine visions. They don't, because it is so sacred, a sacred thing. You don't throw it before anybody and everybody, because you are afraid, without understanding the sacredness, they may utter or do something which is not good towards the good behavior towards a sacred person. In many cases, the visions concerning sacred people and sacred things are not revealed by the saints who experience it. So Jatadhari also did not tell about his visions of Ramchandra because it was too sacred for him. People could only see that he always served a metal image of a child with extraordinary steadfastness every day. They could see only the image, but he was not seeing the image in its place. He was seeing real Bala Gopala or Bala Ramchandra. They knew that much and nothing more. But the insight of the Master, the matchless Lord of the realm of spiritual moods, pierced the gross external curtain at his very first meeting with Jatadhari and ascertained the hidden inward mystery. That means when first they met, Sri Ramakrishna could know that Jatadhari is having visions. He is talking to the Lord Rama, Bala Ramachandra. So he questioned him about it and knew more details about it. Therefore he had a great respect for that monk and joyfully supplied him with all the articles necessary for his service of Ramlala. Besides, the master spent long hours with Jatadhari every day and devoutly witnessed his service of Ramlala. When he would be serving Ramlala, seeing the living God in him, Sri Ramakrishna also see the living God. So he was also interested in his puja. So long hours he would spend with Jatadhari. The master did so only because he, as I have said elsewhere, had the divine vision of Rama's celestial form, the embodiment of spiritual love, which Jatadhari also used to have. Accordingly, the relation of the master with Jatadhari gradually became intimate and respectful. The master, in the mood of a female companion, We have already mentioned that the master spent some time in the mood of a woman to satisfy an urge to develop this aspect of his dual personality. Looking upon himself as the eternal female companion of the universal mother, he applied himself wholly for a pretty long time to her service. He would adorn and decorate her with flower garlands prepared with his own hands and with new gold ornaments got ready by Mathur at his request, fan her with a chamara to cool her person, and sing and dance before her in a woman's dress to please her. It is needless to say that the master undertook to perform all this because of a strong urge to do so arose in his mind of his own accord. The master engaged himself in the Vatsalya mood. The master's love and devotion to Rama revived or in his mind when Jatadhari came, and he had talks with him. The form of Rama that he now saw in the image of Ram Lala under the revived impulse was that of Rama, the embodiment of spiritual love. Therefore, it is no wonder that his mind was now filled with maternal affection for that divine child, because he was practicing the female mood. At that time, he finds Sri Ramachandra as a child. So, the child is connected with its mother through great love, filial love. So, same filial love, mother's love towards her child. So, it sprang up in Sri Ramakrishna's heart. He started loving the Ramachandra as his own child, divine child. The master began to feel towards the divine child that wonderful love and attraction which a mother feels towards her young child. That love and attraction alone, doubtless, made the master now sit beside the child image of Ram Lala and look at it so intently that he did not know how time slipped away. For by means of various sweet childish pranks, the master said the extraordinary effulgent child made him forget everything else, tried to detain him daily near it, watched his path in expectation of his coming, and accompanied him everywhere in spite of his request not to do so. The child Rama used to move about with Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna's effort to realize the ultimate limits. The active mind of the master could not leave any work half finished. That nature of it manifested in the concrete fields of work was also seen in the sphere of subtle ideal world. It was seen that if any idea arose of its own accord in his heart, he could not rest satisfied without reaching its ultimate limits. On studying that nature of his, some readers may think, but is it good? Is it beneficial to a man to run in pursuit of any and every idea that may arise in his mind at any time and become a tool in the hands of his desires? Although that nature of the master did not lead him astray, it should not be imitated by the people in general, inasmuch as all ideas, good and bad, always arise in the minds of weak humanity. Man should never have such a faith in himself as to believe that only good ideas will arise in his mind. Therefore, it should be the aim of man to rein back his desires. That means we should not follow such great people like Ramakrishna. Whatever desire rose in his mind, he would put it into practice to the ultimate. So the author is warning us Sri Ramakrishna could believe that all the ideas that arise in his mind are only good. It is either good for him or good for the world or good for both. So he could always put those ideas into practice without harming himself or harming others. But it is not the case with ordinary people. Therefore, we should not just try to put whatever idea comes into our mind. We must censure, we must filter the good from the bad. And only good ideas are to be given expression to, and the bad ideas suppressed, attenuated, and destroyed in the end. We admit that this is a reasonable argument, but we have something to say in a fuller explanation of this. Controlling desires is not necessary for a confirmed sadhaka like Sri Ramakrishna. We can by no means deny that the mind of a man, excessively desirous of enjoying lust and gold and completely fettered to them, should not repose so much faith in itself. This is a thing to be remembered by all of us ordinary spiritual aspirants. We are not free from attraction to the world. Therefore, we cannot believe always all our desires, that all of them are good. Sometimes bad desires also arise. So we should be very careful about them. Therefore, it is ignorant and short-sighted people alone who can raise any doubt regarding the need for people in general to control their desires. But with some rare sadhakas, the spiritual aspirants, the Vedas and other scriptures say self-control becomes, by the grace of God, as normal a function as breathing. Therefore, completely freed from the attraction of lust and gold, their minds get converted into repositories of good and healthy ideas alone. The Master also said that no evil desire can, by the grace of the Divine Mother, raise its head and have mastery over the mind of a man who has taken perfect refuge in her. If we take perfect refuge in Mother, pray to Mother, Mother, please lead us by the hand. We do not know which is the right path, which is the spiritual practices we have to do. She will never let us go astray. That's what the Master is telling. Mother, said he, prevents him from taking a wrong step. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say, take refuge under Mother. She will prevent you from taking any wrong step. A man who has reached such a state can perfectly trust each and every impulse of his. Then it is not only does him no harm, but becomes a source of immense good to others. For it becomes absolutely impossible for that man to seek his self-interest in that state, inasmuch as the little I, born of the identification with the body, which produces selfishness and is not contented even with the attainment of all the pleasures of the world, is merged forever in the all-pervading eye of God. That means all the desires disappear in a good spiritual aspirant when he takes refuge under the Divine Mother. All his desires he merges into God. Oh God, you have given me the desire, so you yourself do what is to be done. Then we give the authority to God, and God will not allow you to go by the wrong way. He will say, you need not practice this is a bad thing. So you will never go the wrong way, never are led astray. So God will guide us. Because God is the infinite, He loves everyone. So whatever He allows us to do will be only for the benefit of others and benefit for ourselves also. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say that this great incarnations, free from attraction to lust and gold. They always have good thoughts arising in them, and when they put it into action, people get all the benefits of it. So, much more explanation is being given about the extraordinary minds of these great incarnations. We will read them in our next class. Niranjanam nityamanantarupam bhaktanukampadhata vigraham vai Ishavataram parameshamedyam tam Ramakrishnam shirasa namama. O Ramakrishna, the taintless one, the eternal one, the one with infinite forms, the one who has assumed a form out of compassion to the devotees, the incarnate Supreme Soul, and the adorable Lord of all, we salute Thee, bowing our heads. Jai Sri Ram.